So just generally speaking, a review, the basic, well, the right, left brain, very basically. The verbal has to do with language abilities, of course, and it's mostly involves the left side of the brain. And then the performance skills involve the right side of the brain mostly. So manipulating objects, visual, spatial kind of things involve neurons in areas of the left side of the brain, or the right side of the brain. Now the thing is, though, about this idea of verbal on one side and performance on the other side is that actually through years of studies and research, we now know that there's probably all different parts of the brain that are being activated, like for language. But it's primarily divided, and generally speaking, divided in these two different areas. So more on cognitive functioning. The cerebral cortex is involved, and perception is a part of cognition, and that's dealing with the sensory perception, sound, spatial relationship, taste, touch, smell. These are all functions of the cognitive functioning. Reasoning, judgment. Reasoning involves the frontal lobe. Mostly it deals with judgment, planning, executive functioning, and being able to inhibit certain things. So damage to the frontal lobe can affect reasoning. Attention is another important aspect of cognitive functioning that we probably take for granted, and becomes apparent when we see people who have brain damage or dementias, when it's impaired. So attention is divided into these different areas. There's focused attention, being able to focus on something without being distracted. Selected attention, being able to put one thing aside and attend to, something that's needed to be attended to over there. Divided attention is being able to pay attention to two things at one time, and sustained attention, similar to focused attention. And then inhibiting, being able to block out things that are like noises or things in the environment, and that can be difficult. As we age, it gets more difficult to block out those inhibiting kind of noises or distractions. I have noticed that with myself, where I work at this crisis line, that I get easily distracted. I think that this is probably has come with age, that it's very distracting hearing other conversations, noise going on. I feel like I have more trouble focusing or being distracted and not being able to attend to what's going on right there with me. So memory is also part of our cognitive ability and deals with, this is all the cerebral cortex. And of course language is another aspect. And language, generally speaking, remains well preserved with age. And then memory, I'll go into the specific areas of memory, and we'll talk about what aspects of memory decline more than others. With age, cognitive abilities remain intact, and can actually improve some areas while other areas slowly decline. And the areas that can improve have to do with everyday functioning. When older people are tested in the clinic, in the laboratory, compared to younger people, their ability is slower, they don't perform as well, but in real-world tasks, they can perform better in some cases. So probably the difference in ability can be negligible, because if it doesn't affect like daily functioning, an impairment or mild declines, then it probably isn't a problem. Or if we're slower at doing things, I mean, I can adjust to that, right? Just accept it, that it might take you longer. You might be more easily distracted than you were when you were younger. For sure, when you were in your 20s, you were sharper than you are now. And just like athletes or anything, I mean, so our cognition, it seems that it would be the same as the rest of our body, in that, athletes perform at their peak when they're in their young adulthood, and when they're in their 50s, they're not going to be performing as well. They could still be very good, right? But so it would make sense to me that other areas are decline, not as sharp. I focus a lot on memory because people are so worried about losing it, and how we hear people say, or patients who come in worried about their memory, especially, older people who I can think of maybe in their late 60s, early 70s, and worried that they're losing their ability. And so I try to kind of reflect back to them that maybe there's some mild, maybe they're not as sharp as they were in their 20s, but still I can give them examples of what happens in the session and how they can remember what they started talking about when they first came in, and ask them some questions as far as memory, just do a little memory test, and then they can see that their memory is fine. But I think it's a big anxiety, because how horrible to not have your memory, just that idea of being not in control. So it's normal to forget things, and we do become more forgetful as we get older. But when it gets to be extreme, then there's a problem. So I mean, I guess how do you measure that? As far as how do we remember, just real generally speaking, there are 3 stages of memory. First is the acquisition of memory, and that is actually learning the information. And so activities such as speaking and writing activate neurons in the left temporal lobe, which processes language for most people, whereas, so in order to be able to learn the new information, like I was saying earlier, we need to be able to focus and pay attention and not be distracted. So sometimes memory problems are because these problems with being too anxious to learn, or being not being able to focus. And let's see. Older people are more easily distracted by background noises and other interruptions, which can interfere with this initial learning. And memories that affect many of the senses as well as the emotions often are more likely to be retained. So, and the next stage is consolidation, and that's whenever those neuropathways are strengthened. And one major aspect of consolidation is, or something that improves consolidation of memory, is sleep. and particularly in the slow wave sleep and REM sleep, memory gets consolidated. And they've found in REM sleep that the hippocampus is very active, similarly to when we're learning information. And also, memory is more easily consolidated if it can be attached to a memory that's already there. So if you know something familiar about the new memory. Okay, and then the last stage of memory is retrieval. So that's being able to recall the information. You know, it can be slowed as we get older. But mildly. Yeah. There was something I was reading, another study where people, I think over 70, and people in the age range of 20 were shown pictures, visual images, and then, oh, this is more about recall, and then asked to recall what they saw, and the younger group were able to remember a lot more. So, the information needs to be encoded and consolidated, and then we have to be able to pull it back up. And if it's something that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's going to be easier to recall, to retrieve. If it's something that was learned a long time ago, we're going to have trouble. And I think people worry about this, oh, I can't remember, that tip of the tongue kind of thing. But that's normal. So generally speaking, there's there's short-term and long-term memory. Short-term memory is memory that lasts anywhere from a few seconds to a few hours. It's most likely forgotten. And actually with short-term memory, we want to be able to forget things like the number to the Chinese restaurant that you called last night or whatever, because it would be overwhelming if we retained all that information. So it's important function that we're able to forget all these things that we have to remember for a short amount of time, like the phone number. I can't think of any other examples, but you know, how to get to this room or whatever, you know, from an hour ago that we had to do. So primary short-term memory involves holding small amounts of information for a short amount of time. Like I said, the phone number that you just have to remember long enough to make the call. Now working memory, okay, so primary memory remains pretty much intact as we age. Working memory does decline with age, and it involves being able to remember information long enough to do something with it. Like, for example, you have to remember that we're talking about short-term memory to understand what working memory means. So, in the example in testing is the primary memory is repeat these numbers, 4, 5, and 6. And most people are able to repeat those numbers. That's the primary. And working memory involves being able to hold on to those 3 numbers and then do another process, which is repeating them back. Or backwards, repeating them backwards. Now, long-term memory is divided into explicit and implicit. So explicit or declarative memory involves semantic memory, and this is knowledge of facts and meanings of words, that I have to remember that this is a table, or that what is winter, remember what that means. All the things we've learned, you know, over the years. and it has no reference to time. And there's less decline in this area. So we're going to do better with holding on to semantic memory than we are episodic memory. And also working with patients with dementia, I think sometimes it can be helpful to know that semantic memory is more enduring, that we can talk about things like this patient I was seeing who had dementia. It seemed like we could talk about things like recipes and food, things like that, whereas she couldn't remember what she had for breakfast 2 hours prior, but she could remember, you know, some chicken recipes she cooked years ago, her specialty, you know. So episodic memory involves images and details of experiences, personal memories tied to specific times and places. You can remember a vacation you took, your wedding. This declines with age. This is processed in the hippocampus, and Alzheimer's patients have difficulty acquiring new memories. And so people with dementia, what I've found is, and I'm sure we have all experienced this with people, like in the nursing homes, your patients who you see in the nursing home, who you hear the same story over and over, right? Oh, and it can be kind of trying, but those are the familiar grooves, or those memories have been talked about and repeated, so they're like neurologically, they're more ingrained. That's the way I look at it. But as far as new experiences, you don't hear much about things that happen too much, you know, yesterday or last week. So sometimes I find it can be trying hearing these stories over and over. And so that anterograde amnesia is a hallmark in Alzheimer's. And that is not being able to remember new experiences. Okay, so this is again out of the PTSD research, that flashbulb memories are memories that are crystal clear and that involve both the hippocampus and the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is involved with emotions. And interesting, those two areas are connected to each other, right next to each other. So an example of flashbulb memory is like clear memory, vivid memories of traumatic experiences. And they're remembered because we remember things that are emotionally charged. And then under implicit memory, which is not unconscious memory, but an automatic memory, memories that we don't have to be consciously aware of what we're doing. We don't have to stop and think, okay, I have to put the right foot in front of the left foot to walk. Or when an example of implicit memory would be dressing. You don't have to stop and think about, okay, I'm going to do this step, put the right foot on the pants, and then the left foot. So these are implicit memories or automatic memories. They're experienced in the here and now, not subjectively aware that something is being recalled. Involves the amygdala and other areas of the limbic, motor, and sensory cortex. So procedural memory is a type of implicit memory. It's a type of long-term memory consisting of the information you recall automatically in order to do things like motor functions, tie your shoe, ride a bicycle, drive a car, play the piano, I guess play the violin. And the nice thing about procedural memory is that there's minimal decline. So I've heard stories of people in nursing homes who have dementia and cognitive impairment who are able to sit down at the piano and just play beautifully, you know, if that was something that they had learned. Another example of how this procedural memory is more resilient is one day I went into this nursing home where I visit a patient, and there was this woman who I see every week. She isn't my patient, but I happen to see her when I go in every week, and she doesn't speak. I'm not sure what that's about, but it's obvious that she has dementia or some sort of cognitive impairment. I would imagine dementia, and she needs a lot of assistance, but she's able to ambulate. And so I went in one day, and she's knitting away, or maybe it was crocheting. She's crocheting away, you know, like a long strip of something that just going like mad there. And so it made me think that, well, maybe that's because that's procedural memory. And that. Now moving on to a cognitive function that requires quite a bit of ability, and interestingly that we all that we engage in this so frequently, and it's really taxing on our cognition, and that is driving a motor vehicle. And this can become a problem, as we all know, with people who have dementia or start developing cognitive impairment. And it's also a good example of an activity that requires really a complicated an array of abilities. Just as an example of all the things that are required to drive a motor vehicle. How to operate the vehicle, what the signs mean, what the signals mean. You have to remember where you're going, you have to remember how to get there. Working memory, you have to attend to things simultaneously. You have to pay attention to the speedometer, what speed you're going. You have to pay attention to, at the same time as you're paying attention to that, you have to pay attention to where the road's going. You have to have the selective attention to focus on things that need to be focused on, like the street signs as opposed to the billboards. You have to be able to inhibit, as far as in the area of attention, inhibit distractions like noises, but yet you have to know that when a horn honks, that means pay attention. And then, of course, the motor skill, the visual spatial, needing to know where to stop at the stop sign, and also needing to have that understanding of how fast other vehicles are going, and the visual spatial, and how much time you have to turn out. And there's a lot of, when I was reading, there's a lot of information about accidents and left-hand turns and neurological functioning, because that's an extremely difficult task cognitively, making that left-hand turn. You have to, because when I started looking into this, I became more aware of how difficult this thing that we do. So helping older patients adjust to not driving, there's the driver rehabilitation specialist who you can consult, and they can help the person get their test. I don't know, pass the test. I guess it depends if it's anxiety related to taking the test, or at least they can evaluate the person and determine whether or not they are able to drive, and then you have an authority, this organization, who can say, no, this person isn't able to drive. So, because I've got most of this information from this book that's published through the American Medical Association, Assessing and Counseling Older Drivers, which, if anyone's interested, I can tell you where to get that, because it used to be you could get it for free. So that's where I got that resource. No, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, 2 slides. You can recommend that people drive during the day, no long distance, don't turn on the radio, so that attention factor can be addressed, and then start using alternate transportation. But like when I brought this up, start taking the bus, someone in the class said, well, wait a minute, that takes a lot of cognitive ability to figure out how to get the bus, where to get off, and so that's not going to work. But perhaps taxis, dial-a-ride, access, and as you're seeing the person starting to have problems, I think it's probably a good idea to start discussing that or planning ahead for if this happens, how to get around, because it's a major issue, getting to doctor's appointments, your social life, right? Or, I mean, it has a profound effect on a person's life, particularly the way we live, right? Our transportation. So just to back up here,